Welcome to the Preserving Family Podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to equip you to gain insight, information, and inspiration to help you protect, teach, and guide your family during these turbulent times. Our goal is to provide tools and resources to help you strengthen and preserve your own marriages and families. Now here are your hosts, Dr. Mark and Janie Ogletree.
Well, everyone, I'm so grateful to be here today with Preserving Families, and I'm in the office of Dr. Rick Miller here at BYU. And Dr. Rick, thanks for letting me come over.
It's my pleasure. I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, so good to be here. I'm going to introduce you, Rick, really quick. Been a faculty member here at BYU in the MFT program since 1999. Prior to teaching at BYU, you were a professor in the Marriage and Family Therapy Department and program at Kansas State for 11 years. Your primary work is with couples, and your research focuses on couple therapy, especially the role that therapists play in successful therapy. Your wife is also an MFT.
Yes.
Nine children and 4 biological, 5 adopted, and 5 grandkids. Is that up to date? 5 grandkids?
We're up to 9 grandkids now.
Okay, awesome. That's so great. And that's a great part of life, isn't it?
It is. It's wonderful.
I always tell people that's no one told us about our children or what that was going to be like, and definitely no one told us about grandchildren, how that was going to be. But what a cool experience!
Yeah, I just have to tell you one quick thing is that we adopted some children. Our youngest is actually 11 years old now, and she's in 5th grade at a school, and our 2 oldest grandchildren go to the same elementary school.
Oh my gosh.
So our 2nd grade grandson tells all of his classmates that his aunt is in the 5th grade, and no one believes him. So what a fun thing to happen.
Yeah, to have your aunt at your school with you, right?
Right.
And by the way, only in the church can we do that, I think, right?
Right.
So Rick, this is a great topic. It's been on my mind for a long time, and that's just the role that parents have with their adult children. We know that there are issues on both sides of that, but one of the experiences I wanted to just share with you that I've had a lot in my own therapy practice, and it goes something like this: a couple who lives here, a young married couple who lives here in Provo, and they receive a phone call from one of their parents who lives in another part of the country, and the parents have means, and they say, "We want you to move out and live with us. We bought a house right next door. And so you're going to go ahead and move out here." And then the young man says, "But I don't have a job out. Don't worry about that. We'll take care of all that. But we have a house for you, so here you come." And I've just seen variations of all kinds of interference like that with parents and their adult children. Rick, any thoughts on why in our LDS culture do we hold on to those kids so tightly?
I think there's a couple of things. Number one is family is so important in our culture. And so with family being so important, of course, we're going to want to maintain these close relationships. And I think another factor is that we want our children to turn out well. We have a lot more invested. We believe in eternal families. We believe that only certain decisions that our children make will lead them to exaltation and eternal life. And so we are very, very invested and care very much about the decisions our children make. And so the temptation then is to try to help them make those decisions.
Right, and to hold on extra tight sometimes. You know?
Right.
So we see that a lot. There's, we could probably talk all day about examples, but I even remember one here at BYU where the future husband came and talked to me in my office here, and he said, "I'm just really worried because, first of all, when I tried to call at Christmas time and talk to his girlfriend, the dad wouldn't let him have that conversation because he said, 'This is our family time,'"
Oh, wow.
And then the parents explained to this young man that if you do marry our daughter, here are what the expectations are. And one of them is you'll live where we tell you need to live. Those are extreme. I mean, I know those are some of the extreme ones, but everything from that to parents being upset if the Christmas vacation is divided up a certain way, or anyway, we just know that there's all kinds of issues, surrounding parents and their adult children.
Right.
So I want everyone to know that Rick came to our stake and spoke at what we have as an annual marriage and family conference in our stake, and he spoke on this topic. And so, Rick, I just have a couple things that I wrote down that from what you said, and here's one of your statements: that in 1900, 22% of 40-year-olds had both parents alive, But today, 60% of 40-year-olds have both of their parents alive. And then you said it, and I thought this was amazing, it's more likely for a 20-year-old to have a grandmother alive today than having their mother alive in 1900. So just maybe some of the positive and negative implications of this idea of longevity.
Yeah, they call that the demographic revolution.
Wow.
Longevity, people are just living a lot longer. In the year 1900, the life expectancy was about 46, 47 years, and now it's late 70s, early 80s. It's just gotten so much longer. And the good part about that is now relationships, because of that, relationships are longer. It used to be back in the pioneer days that that typically by the time the children were being launched, that one of the parents were dead.
Yeah.
Or both. Of childbirth, deaths were very, very common among women with husbands. Farm accidents, illness. So this demographic revolution is having a profound influence on family life, because we didn't used to have to deal with it. They weren't that common. One kind of aside I think is interesting to consider is that this demographic revolution has also changed dramatically marital relationships. Just let me jump there just for a second.
Sure.
For example, it used to be that being married was synonymous with being a parent, because within a year after being married, you had a child.
Yeah.
And then typically one of you would die before the last one left. And so marriage was pretty much parenting. But nowadays, because people are living longer, couples, another thing about that is that now most couples usually wait 1 or 2 or 3 years before they have a baby. Not always, but so they have this early honeymoon period where there's just the two of them. And then nowadays, because they're living longer, they're going to be empty nesters for 2 or 3 decades.
Wow.
And so now all of a sudden we want to like our partner and becoming friends with our partner and enjoying being with each other. And so it's completely changed the dynamics about what a good marriage is.
Yeah.
And so we really value who we marry, and friendship and being able to get along is so much more important than it used to be 150 years ago, because back in the day you just had to just parent together and survive. And now you have so many more years of being apart that it's important to get along. So it's also influenced the parent-child relationship. I tell my students the first day of class that they will spend twice as many years as an adult child as they did as a young child.
Yeah.
And they all kind of look at me in surprise. And I said, because by the time you're 18 or 20, most of you will be, at least to some degree, kind of starting to move on a little bit. But you'll spend on average about 40 years as an adult child, because most of you will have a parent in your 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
And so you're going to spend 40 years as an adult child and only about 20 years as a kid. And that's a new, and so we are trying now to kind of catch up and understand what those relationships are like for those 40 years.
Right. So great thoughts. In fact, I always remember, once again, I didn't grow up in the church, so maybe that was a little bit different. But I still remember my grandparents in their 60s. They just looked like they were 90. They were sitting in chairs and just watching us, where now grandparents are playing pickleball and running in marathons. And
Right.
I mean, just people look so much younger and they act so much younger today.
Right.
So, Rick, do you have any story or experience that could help all of us understand, just kind of the dynamics of this parent/adult-child relationship? Yeah,
one of the challenges that now that parents are living longer and being able to enjoy this parent-child relationship into adulthood is that it's kind of ambiguous.
Yeah.
We sort of know what we're supposed to do as parents. In fact, the proclamation of the family says lots of things about what we should do as parents. There's nothing said about what do we do in terms of adult-child, older parent relationships. And so it's a really ambiguous, there's not strong norms like there are for parenting younger children. And so that ambiguity is made it more difficult. It's more of a negotiable relationship. And I remember we had neighbors years ago in another neighborhood that we lived in, that one of the problems that the couple was dealing with was that they'd been married 20 years, and the wife found out that the husband had a joint checking account with his dad.
Oh, wow.
And she wasn't included in it. And so that relationship was really strong with his dad, and they'd use that for hunting and kind of guy things, and she was really upset that she wasn't part of this thing, and he just thought it was no big deal that he had this joint account with his dad, and sadly they finally got divorced for that and several other reasons.
Sure.
But yeah, that's just kind of violating some important principles.
Yeah,
of that
for sure. Well, I love, you've talked about this idea of this hierarchy, that when children are younger, the hierarchy with children and their parents is very clear. But then as our children become older, the hierarchy begins to dissolve, as you've said. And so what do older, seasoned parents do when this hierarchy begins to erode? And I'm sure it's a huge identity shift for sure. In fact, it's one of the biggest shifts that parents need to make when their children become adults. Or in other words, I've heard you say that parents need to shift, right? We can't stay and continue to parent like we did when our kids were 12, and now that they're 35, which I think is a huge problem, right? That still happens. And so how do parents need to adjust? Tell us about the hierarchy and how they're going to have to adjust as their children become older.
Yeah, when our children are younger, it's healthy to have a hierarchy. A hierarchy meaning that mom and dad are in charge.
Yeah.
And dysfunctional families are where the 5-year-old or the 11-year-old or the 14-year-old's in charge. And the parents need to be in charge. That's part of a healthy family.
Sure.
Now, hopefully we have family councils and there's decisions made, but still mom and dad have veto power. But that starts changing, a little gradual shift in adolescence, but there comes a time when the parents aren't in charge anymore. Mm. And that's a little bit of a challenge for one thing, just because of inertia. I mean, out of habit, you've been in charge for 18 years, and now all of a sudden you're not supposed to be in charge. And so that's a huge adjustment for the parents. Less so among the young adult and the adult children, because they've been wanting this since they were 9.
Yeah.
But for the parents to let go of that hierarchy, and by hierarchy in this situation, what we're meaning is at some point the parents don't tell the kids what time to go to bed. Mm-hmm. At some point, the parents don't tell the kids where to go on vacation. They don't tell their kids, be sure to put gas in your car, especially after they get married. Now, let me back up just a little bit. One aspect of this parent-child relationship is that transition to adulthood is a lot more ragged and uneven than it used to be. 70 or 80 years ago, before children went to college and before missions were so common, you would turn 19, 20, fall in love, and get married. And one day you
were married in your early 20s, right?
Yeah. And one day you're living with mom and dad, and then you go to the temple, you get sealed, and the next day you're living on your own. And so there's this clear demarcation that you're going from kind of childhood's early young adulthood to being a grown-up.
Yeah.
But nowadays with missions, even girls go on missions now, and college, I mean, so your daughter goes on a mission for 18 months, she comes back, and then, so is she a grown-up yet? Is she not a grown-up? Is she going to be back on the chore chart? Is she not on the chore chart? And then they go to college again, and so it could be years. Especially nowadays, a lot of our children go to graduate school. There's years before that they really become independent and fully adult. I mean,
sure.
And some of the markers are getting married, having children, buying a home, and sometimes that can take a decade for all, finish graduate school. We have a son-in-law who's in his early 30s, and he's a medical resident still, and it's going to be, that's a long haul.
Right.
And so this transition to adulthood is a much more longer, uneven process than it used to be. But parents need to make this shift where they start giving the decision making to their children and even advice.
Yeah,
they give their children. I mean, we have several years ago we had one of our adult children, and he was on his they were making a decision where where he was going to take his job and where they were going to move to and stuff. And of course, my wife and I were longing for them to stay in Utah Valley, or at least in Utah,
right?
So we could visit them and be close to our grandkids and all those things. But my wife and I knew that wasn't that making any even kind of advice would interfere with that process. It was their stewardship. God knew where they needed to go. God knew where they needed to serve, what ward they needed to be in, and where the best place for them to raise their family would be. And my wife and I, we would kind of bite our tongues. And then they'd say, well, we're thinking about this place. We'd all be cheering. And then the next day it'd be another place 1,000 miles away. But we just knew that we needed to back out of that and have that be their decision, that they needed to be talking to each other and to God about where they were going to live as a family.
Yeah.
And,
which isn't always easy, right? Like you say, when you want them so close. And
yeah, we longed for them to not move away. And so it takes a little bit of discipline sometimes.
Yeah.
And like I say, and part of it's habitual, because when they were 12 and 14, we told them what to do, or at least guided them. But not in that situation.
Yeah.
Not in that situation.
It feels like to me the biggest adjustment is probably from control to really cheerleading, right? I mean, that's really what your role is now, in terms of we can't tell them where to move. We can't tell them what to do. I've even had issues in our own family where I thought, I think I need to say something. And my wife has said, no, you can't say anything. That's not your role anymore.
Right.
And she's right? So, Rick, let's talk about this principle that you taught. And in fact, that article that we should refer to everyone to read, I think it's, now I don't remember the name of it, but it's about newlyweds.
Yeah.
And it was about what? Ensign 2006? I don't remember the month.
Yeah, I think it was January 2006 is when it came out. Yeah.
Great article. One of the things you talk about in that article is this great principle of reciprocity. Would love to kind of just hear you develop that for a minute.
Yeah, it was. I learned it the hard way. I was teaching a workshop. I was teaching to a stake marriage seminar back when I was a graduate student in Southern California. And I was teaching about this idea of adult children and their parents, and I talked about this idea of hierarchy, and that there comes a time when the parents don't boss their kids around anymore. They don't tell them what to do. That the kids are on their own. They make their own decisions.
Right.
And I taught it 3 times. The first 2 times was to the 20-something-year-olds, and they loved it. They said, "Oh my goodness, our parents, they control us. They tell us what to do. We keep telling them we want to be adults, but they don't treat us like adults." And I was young at the time, so I thought, yeah, this is great. And then the 3rd time I taught the class, the last class, their parents showed up, the 50-something-year-olds, and I thought, oh my goodness, I was young myself, and so I just really sheepishly started teaching these concepts about hierarchy and how it dissolves, and when you're adult, when the children are adult, of course they respect you and they honor you, but still you don't have any control over them anymore. And sure enough, all the hands shot up. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is hard.
Yeah.
And the first person said, I agree with you 100%, Brother Miller, but the problem is our children won't act like adults. They keep telling us that they want us to treat them like adults, but they don't act like adults. And I was intrigued.
Yeah.
And I turned it to someone else, and they said, yeah, just the other day, our daughter and her husband came over and said, you need to treat us like adults. You need to treat us like adults. And okay, we'll treat you like adults. But then on Sunday, they called up and said, we're hungry. Can we come over for dinner?
Yeah.
And then someone else raised their hand and said, yeah, treat us like adults. But then they called up the next day and said, hey, we don't have any gas money. Do you have any money for gas? And then these parents were saying, we would love to treat them like adults, but we need them to act like adults. And that got me thinking, so what's the mechanism for that?
Yeah.
And I came up with this sociological concept called reciprocity.
Yeah.
And the idea of reciprocity is the norm of returning favors. And that is, if I do something nice for you, you do something nice for me.
Right.
Now, when our kids are little, we don't do that. We shower them with nurturance and care and gifts and all kinds of things, and hopefully they're kind and nice back to us. But that will never be a healthy adult-child relationship.
Right.
In fact, I call that the Santa Claus syndrome.
Okay.
In other words, and I've seen this so many times where the children are 30, 35 years old and 40, and they still treat their mom and dad like Santa Claus, these mysterious beings that shower money and goods on them. And the children do very little in response. And so that's never going to work. I realized that you can never have a healthy adult-child parent relationship until there's some degree of reciprocity.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that you try to match them dollar for dollar, because usually your parents have more resources than you, but it's gesture for gesture. I remember.
I like that.
I remember when I was in my doctoral program that my dad called up and was talking to me about, and asked me how my schooling was going, how my class was going, and I said, this and this and this, and I said, Dad, how's your work going? And it started changing our relationship. How's it going for you, Dad? Yeah, how's it going for you? And then talk to my mom, how's your Relief Society lesson going?
Right.
And then our relationship started to kind of shift a little bit, not just in terms of money, but in terms of I was acting more like an adult because I was treating them like an adult.
Right.
Not just Santa Claus. And so I really believe that that's one of the primary principles for a healthy adult child-parent relationship, is where there's that mutual nurturing, that mutual giving, that mutual assistance. The parents go help the children do something, adult children, and then the adult children do something back. Just this past weekend, one of our sons is moving here in the valley, and he borrowed our little utility trailer in our van to help move some of his stuff. And then at the end of the day, he says, he emailed me and said, "Thanks, Dad, I'm almost done. What kind of gas do you put in your van?"
Yeah, there you go.
That's only $10-15 or whatever, but that's that gesture that says, I'm a grown up. Thank you.
Yeah.
And we have a really healthy relationship with him because he kind of honors, he respects that, that we're people too, that we're just not a petroleum company, that that we did something nice for him and he wants to
return the favor.
He wants to return the favor.
I love that you said gesture for gesture. I think that's wonderful. One of the things I see is sometimes it becomes a competition because you have two sets of parents now.
Oh, right.
And so who are the parents that are paying for the cruise and paying for the trip and all that? Those are the parents who often win in terms of who gets to see the kids the most. You could see the challenge in that. And then the other part I was thinking, Rick, as you were talking, is just even how difficult it is for my wife. Anytime our children want to do something for us, she's the first one to say, no, you don't have to do that. Or I'm like, right. Honey, let them. No, that's great. That's great that they want to do that. That helps them to become adults, right? But
right,
you can see the challenge in all that with all kinds of different factors.
Right.
So Rick, of course, this is going to beg the question of, okay, so what does a healthy parent, then their adult children relationship look like?
I've thought about that a lot, and I've developed a metaphor.
Yeah.
And the metaphor is think about an extended family. There's mom and dad, and let's say there's 3 or 4 kids that are all adults now, and let's imagine them living on the same cul-de-sac. And I think that the principles that help us realize what a good neighborhood is are the same principles that help us know what a good extended family looks like. For example, of course we need social connection. A good neighborhood are the ones that come out in the cul-de-sac on 4th of July and light fireworks together.
Put their lawn chairs next to each other and talk
chairs,
and
they have a picnic together, and there's lots of that kind of stuff. A lot of visiting, and the kids playing together, and those kind of things. And so there needs to be social connection in a healthy neighborhood, but there also has to be boundaries. I don't tell my neighbors what kind of flowers to plant in their front yard.
Nor do you walk right through their front door and say, well, what's for dinner?
Right, exactly. I don't tell them what color to paint their fence. I don't remind them that it's been 3 hours since the garbage truck came and they should be putting their garbage cans back in their front yard, in their garage. So there's a healthy neighborhood has lots of good social connection, but there's also boundaries.
Yeah. There's
certain things we don't
cross.
We don't cross those lines. We don't tell them how to run their little household. We just don't, like you say, we just don't open their door. We knock on the door. There's a boundary there. We don't tell our neighbors how many kids to have. That's kind of their decision. And so we understand how to have a healthy neighborhood, but I think if we translate those principles to an extended family, some of the ambiguity goes by because we know how to do that. We know how to have social connections, but we also understand the principle of boundaries and having healthy boundaries.
Yeah. I think that's great. Fences make good neighbors, right? And,
right.
And certainly boundaries can help in a relationship.
And another feature about this is they don't gossip.
Yeah.
Good neighbors don't gossip. A good neighborhood does not have a lot of gossiping going on. The same thing, if your mom and you had a kind of a difficult conversation, your first phone call shouldn't be to your sister.
Yeah.
Or that's called gossiping, and that's not how the Savior wants us to be.
Not how it should work.
So let's take this one step further. Sometimes, so this cul-de-sac lives this way, but sometimes there's a crisis, or sometimes there's an issue.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite concepts about when we talk about parent-adult-child relationships is that one of the roles that the grandparents play, and parents of the adult children, is what it's called the Family National Guard. And that is and when things are going well, the parents kind of hold back and they take their kids to McDonald's, and maybe they'll treat them to Disneyland one day or whatever it is. They just make them feel loved and special and those kind of things that grandparents can do. But if there's a family crisis, unemployment, sadly maybe a divorce or something like that,
or sickness,
health problems, then the parents go from their kind of McDonald's role to they put on their uniforms and they go into more of a helper role.
The National Guard comes in, right?
Right. And maybe a daughter who's newly divorced moves in your basement for a year because she needs to get her feet on the ground, and maybe you'll do more babysitting because for her to go back to school and finish her degree would be a really good long-term solution. And so parents can, and they usually have the resources and the wisdom, these parents do, to really provide help. That's a stabilizing influence. And one thing I learned being a young married at the time was my wife and I were fiercely independent, but knowing that we could call our parents gave us a lot of courage. And knowing that
they were there,
they were there, would give us the courage to take one more step in the darkness, knowing that if we got lost or needed really help, our parents were one phone call away. And so we really tried hard to be independent and rarely called them, but knowing that we could was such a huge safety net and a huge sense of safety in our lives.
Rick, that leads us right into that awesome story that you told at our conference about your parents when you got sick. Or when you were, am I remembering that right?
Right.
You had just started your doctoral program?
Yeah, so I was just starting. I took my first job out in Kansas, and I hadn't finished my dissertation yet, which is a big deal for a doctoral student. And I was told I had 1 year to finish it or else I'd be fired in my new job. We had a brand new baby, and so I was working long hours. I'd usually get home from work at 3 or 4 in the morning because I was spending time. I had to do my teaching, and then in the evening I would work on my dissertation, come home, sleep for 3 or 4 hours, go back to work. My wife got sick, our little baby got sick, they weren't sleeping, and we were just not making it. We were so struggling. It was winter time, and it was just very, very difficult. So I finally called my parents. Her parents weren't available at the time, and so we called my parents. They lived in Utah, about 1,000 miles away, and I just said, we're not making it. And that was hard to call them because my wife and I are so independent. But we were just really struggling. And so my parents, with their modest means, drove out. In fact, they drove, all straight through and were with us. And, we're with the baby. My wife went to the doctor. They took the baby to the doctor. They started feeling better. And they spent about a week with us. And it just really helped stabilize us and helped us not think like we're sinking anymore. And then after about a week, they went back home because we didn't need the National Guard anymore. We were doing okay.
The National Guard came in and stabilized the situation, right?
And then they left after a week. And but what a blessing that was to my wife and I. We really needed the help. Yeah. And so that's what that generation can do. This grandparent generation can be this stabilizing force that's always on the ready, just like the National Guard are. They're ready. They're ready to roll in. They're McDonald's grandparents, but when they needed, they can roll in and they can offer really tangible, life-saving assistance.
Oh, I think that's so great. One of the things, Rick, that we've learned as adult parents, and what we try to do is we try not to command, we try not to direct. In fact, when we're with our children, if there would be a crisis, we would say, guys, what do you need us to do? We want to do what you need us to do.
Right, which is exactly what the principle is that the National Guard can't call themselves up. The governor has to call them up. So you don't volunteer necessarily. You can volunteer to help, but you just don't show up, those adult children need to ask for
to initiate that, right? Yeah, exactly. So I think that's been a great principle for us, is to try to let our children know that we're there. But if you need something, what do you need? And let us understand that, or help us understand what you need. And so how can we as parents of adult children, stay close to our children and our grandkids, but not be intrusive?
Right. I think if we go back to the fundamentals of parenting young children, there's two major factors in parenting. One is to love, encourage, nurture, cheer, and the other one is to monitor, discipline, correct, and guide.
Right.
And you need both of those to be a good parent of young children. As these children grow up, you leave the second part.
Right.
You keep the love and the cheerleading, the nurturance and the encouragement, the more the better. But you give up the monitoring, the guiding, the directing, the correcting. You give that up. And so I think if we think about that, because we've been cheering our children on for years, you keep that going.
Keep it, yeah.
You keep that going. You just give up the correcting,
the regulation part, right?
Yeah, the regulation part. Thank you. And so, and then as our children become adults, and we're adults with them, then I think that the principles of having good relationships with adults holds. And that's, I'm convinced, it's about looking inward when there's an issue, repenting, and then forgiving each other. Of course, just like in a marriage, there's little squabbles, there's little thunderstorms that occur. And we deal with it by looking inward. We repent, we apologize, and our partner forgives us. And those same principles hold for adult children. Look inward, you don't gossip, you just deal with the issue and
create the ideal cul-de-sac, right?
Right. In cul-de-sac, you apologize, you forgive each other, and you grow together for eternity.
Well, I think that's great. Rick, this has been so awesome and so informative. And once again, we want to refer everyone back to that article from, did you say January 2006. Newlyweds and Their Parents. There's so many great principles in there, and that's where a lot of your great quotes and statements are. But we always love to borrow from Brent Barlow, one of your former colleagues in the day of LDS stands for Let's Do Something. And so as we think of that, is there an invitation that we could give those that are listening today? Yeah,
I would just encourage parents of adult children to just sit down with your partner and just take a little bit of inventory. How are we doing? How are we as parents of adult children? Again, it's an ambiguous role, and there isn't a clear guidebook. But we've talked about some principles today of like hierarchy and adult relationships and reciprocity and the Family National Guard and some of these boundaries. Yeah. And just as a couple, just kind of go over with each of your children. How are we doing? What could we improve with? What could we improve in? And I think maybe that'd be and if there's action items beyond that, then maybe that would be appropriate. But just do an inventory and see how you're doing. I think that's a great place to begin. Well, Dr. Rick Miller, thank you so much for being part of this today. We're so grateful for the work that you do and how you move the Lord's kingdom forward in so many ways with the family. So thank you for being with us today. Thank you. It's been my pleasure.